The scorching sun beat down mercilessly, as Sophia Keller's lungs burned with each desperate breath. Her throat parched from the arid desert air and hours of running. Behind her, dust clouds signaled the approach of the three men who had been hunting her since dawn, ruthless outlaws who wouldn't stop until they caught her, or until she collapsed from exhaustion in the punishing heat of the Texas borderlands. It was 1878, and the frontier justice of Eagle Pass, Texas, was as harsh as its landscape. Sophia had never imagined she'd find herself fleeing across the desert, her once fine dress torn and filthy, her dark hair falling loose from its pins as she stumbled over rocks and scraggly brush. The men pursuing her were closing in, their horses gaining ground despite her head start and desperate determination. "There she is, I see her," the cruel voice of Wade Thornton, the leader of the gang, carried across the desert. "She won't get far now." Sophia fought back tears of desperation. Her legs trembled beneath her, muscles screaming in protest with each step. She was going to die here, alone in this desolate wasteland, and no one would ever know what became of her. The sound of another horse, this one approaching from the direction she was running toward, caused her heart to sink. They had cut her off. This was it. She slowed, momentarily defeated, when she realized this rider was different. He rode tall in the saddle atop a magnificent palomino, moving with purpose and speed that far outmatched her pursuers. The stranger's eyes locked with hers across the distance, and even in her terror, Sophia noted their striking intensity. Without hesitation, he urged his horse forward, racing toward her with determination written across his sun-bronzed face. "Hold on," he called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "I'm coming." Vincent Harrington had been tracking a herd of wild mustangs when he spotted the woman running across the desert floor. One glance at the men chasing her told him everything he needed to know. No decent men pursued a woman like that, not in this territory, not with those expressions of malice clearly visible even at a distance. He spurred his horse forward, the powerful animal responding instantly to his command. Shadow was the fastest horse in 3 counties, a fact Vince had never been more grateful for than at this moment. The palomino ate up the ground between them, and Vince leaned low over his neck, his eyes never leaving the exhausted woman who had now collapsed to her knees. As he reached her, Vince extended his arm without slowing. "Take my hand," he shouted. Sophia looked up at the approaching rider, hope and fear warring in her expression. She had no choice but to trust this stranger. With the last of her strength, she reached up and grasped his outstretched hand. With a powerful pull, Vince swung her up behind him on Shadow's back. "Hold tight," he commanded, and Sophia wrapped her arms around his waist, clinging desperately as the horse wheeled around. "You there. That woman's our property," shouted the lead pursuer, drawing his gun. Vince didn't bother responding. He urged Shadow into a full gallop, the horse's powerful muscles bunching as he launched forward with remarkable speed. Behind them, shots rang out, but they were already pulling away, Shadow's superior breeding and conditioning proving the difference between life and death. "My name's Vincent Harrington," he called over his shoulder as they raced across the desert. "Those men after you look like trouble." "Sophia Keller," she managed to reply between ragged breaths, her arms tightening around his waist as they jumped over a small arroyo. They're going to kill me." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Vince promised, steering Shadow toward a narrow canyon that would provide them cover. "My ranch isn't far. We'll lose them in the ravines." Sophia pressed her face against his back, overwhelmed by exhaustion and the sudden turn of events. This stranger, this cowboy, had appeared out of nowhere like an answer to prayers she hadn't even had time to utter. The outlaws' horses were already falling behind, unable to match Shadow's pace across the unforgiving terrain. Vince guided his horse with expert precision through a maze of rocky outcroppings that would make pursuit nearly impossible. Shadow, responding to his lightest touch, navigated the treacherous path without hesitation. After half an hour of hard riding, Vince finally slowed Shadow to a walk. They had entered a narrow canyon with high walls that provided shade from the relentless sun. A small spring bubbled up from between rocks, creating a tiny oasis in the barren landscape. "We can rest here for a moment," Vince said, helping Sophia slide down from the horse. "Shadow needs water, and I reckon you do too." Sophia's legs buckled as her feet touched the ground, and Vince caught her before she fell. His hands were strong but gentle as he steadied her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion and thirst. "I thought I was going to die out there." Vince led her to the spring, where she gratefully sank to her knees and cupped the cool water in her hands. After she had drunk her fill, she splashed water on her face, washing away some of the dust and dried tears. "Who are those men?" Vince asked, keeping his voice neutral as he watered Shadow. Sophia's hands trembled as she pushed her hair back from her face. "Wade Thornton and his gang, they raided the stagecoach I was traveling on yesterday, killed the driver and the other passengers." Her voice caught. "I managed to escape during the night while they were drinking, but they've been after me ever since." Vince's expression darkened. "Thornton, I've heard of him. Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as deadly." "They'll keep looking for me," Sophia said, fear returning to her eyes. "They said I was a witness, that they couldn't let me reach Eagle Pass." "Were you headed to Eagle Pass?" Vince asked, offering her his canteen. Sophia nodded, taking a sip of the water. "I was going to stay with my aunt. She owns a small millinery shop there." Vince considered this information. "My ranch is about 2 hours' ride from here, in the opposite direction from Eagle Pass. We can rest there tonight, then I can take you to town tomorrow, but we'll need to be careful. Thornton has friends in some unsavory places." "I don't want to put you in danger," Sophia said, though the thought of facing the desert alone again terrified her. Vince's mouth curved into a reassuring smile. "I was already in danger the moment I decided to help you. Might as well see it through." As Shadow rested, Vince kept a vigilant eye on their back trail while Sophia told him more about herself. She had been living in San Antonio with her uncle after her parents died, but his new wife had made it clear Sophia wasn't welcome. Her aunt in Eagle Pass had offered her a home and work in her shop. "What about you?" Sophia asked. "Do you have family at your ranch?" Vince shook his head. "Just me and my foreman, Lewis, and a couple of ranch hands. I came out here 5 years ago from St. Louis. Wanted space to breathe and land of my own." When Shadow was rested, they continued their journey, taking a circuitous route that would be difficult to track. Vince was impressed by Sophia's resilience. Despite her ordeal, she rode well, adjusting to Shadow's gait and following Vince's instructions without complaint. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the silhouette of Vince's ranch house appeared on the horizon. It was a modest structure, but solid and well-maintained, with a barn and corral nearby. Smoke curled from the chimney, signaling that someone was home. "Lewis must be cooking dinner," Vince said as they approached. "He's from Mexico originally, makes the best chili this side of the Rio Grande." As they rode into the yard, a middle-aged Mexican man emerged from the house, rifle in hand. Upon seeing Vince, he lowered the weapon, but his expression remained wary as he noticed Sophia. "Senor Vincent, we were getting worried," he called out. "Who is your guest?" Vince dismounted and helped Sophia down. "Lewis, this is Miss Sophia Keller. She had some trouble with Thornton's gang. They were chasing her across the desert when Shadow and I intercepted them. Lewis's expression grew grave. "Thornton, that is bad business, senor. I know. We'll need to keep watch tonight. Can you ask Miguel to take first shift and see if Maria has something that might fit Miss Keller? She could use a change of clothes." Lewis nodded and disappeared into a smaller building adjacent to the main house. Moments later, a young woman emerged, smiling shyly at Sophia. "This is Maria, Lewis's daughter," Vince explained. "She helps with the household." Maria approached Sophia with a warm smile. "Come, señorita. I will find you clothes and prepare a bath. You must be exhausted." Sophia looked at Vince, gratitude shining in her eyes despite her exhaustion. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks," he replied simply. "Get some rest. We'll talk more over dinner." While Maria led Sophia to the house, Vince tended to Shadow, rubbing him down and giving him extra oats for his extraordinary effort. The horse had likely saved both their lives today, and Vince told him so as he worked. Inside the house, Sophia luxuriated in the first hot bath she'd had in days. The stagecoach journey had been dusty and uncomfortable even before the attack, and her desperate flight across the desert had left her filthy and aching. As she washed away the grime, she tried not to think about the horrific events she had witnessed: the other passengers' terrified faces, the sound of gunshots, the cruel laughter of Thornton and his men as they looted the coach. Maria had provided a simple cotton dress that was a bit short for Sophia's taller frame but clean and comfortable. After dressing, Sophia found her way to the kitchen where Lewis was stirring a pot of chili while Maria set the table. "Ah, señorita, you look much better," Lewis said approvingly. "Sit, please. Dinner is almost ready." Vince entered a few moments later, his hair damp from his own wash-up. He had changed into clean clothes as well, and Sophia was struck by how handsome he was: tall and broad-shouldered, with brown hair that curled slightly when wet, and those intense blue eyes that had locked with hers across the desert. "You look more comfortable," he said, taking a seat across from her. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Sophia replied. "Though I'm worried about what happens next. Thornton isn't likely to give up easily." Vince nodded soberly. "You're right about that. Men like him can't afford to leave witnesses. But you'll be safe here tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out the best way to get you to Eagle Pass." Lewis served the chili with fresh tortillas, and Sophia realized she was ravenous. She ate gratefully, savoring the complex flavors of the spicy stew. "This is delicious," she told Lewis, who beamed with pleasure. "An old family recipe," he replied. "Good for strength after a long day." After dinner, while Maria cleared the dishes, Vince spread a map on the table. "There are several routes to Eagle Pass," he explained, tracing lines with his finger. "The direct way would take us through open country where we'd be easy to spot, but there's another trail that follows the river. It's longer but offers more cover." Sophia studied the map, anxiety creeping back into her expression. "How will I know if my aunt is safe? What if Thornton's men are watching for me in town? I have a friend there, Sheriff Samuel Parker. He's a good man, honest. We'll send word ahead to him tomorrow at first light. Miguel can ride to the telegraph office at the trading post." Their planning was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Vince immediately reached for the rifle hanging by the door. "Stay inside," he instructed Sophia, exchanging a look with Lewis, who produced a shotgun from beneath the counter. "Maria, take Miss Keller to the back room," Lewis directed, and Maria quickly ushered Sophia away. Heart pounding, Sophia followed Maria to a small bedroom at the rear of the house. Through the window, she could see Vince and Lewis stepping onto the porch, weapons ready. A single rider approached, not the group she feared, and after a moment she heard Vince call out a greeting. "It's Jim Wallace. Maria explained, relief evident in her voice. "He works the south pasture." Moments later, Vince appeared at the bedroom door. "It's all right," he assured them. "Just one of my hands coming back from town, but he brings news. Thornton and his men were seen asking questions about a woman matching your description. They're offering a reward for information." Sophia paled. "They'll come here, won't they?" "Eventually they might, but they don't know about my connection to you yet. Still, we should leave at first light. The river route will be safest." Vince's expression was determined. "I won't let them find you, Sophia. I promise you that." That night, Sophia slept fitfully despite her exhaustion. Maria had given her the small guest room with fresh linens and a lamp burning low. Every sound made her start the creak of the house settling, the distant howl of a coyote, the murmur of voices as the men took turns keeping watch. She rose before dawn, finding Maria already in the kitchen preparing coffee and a simple breakfast of eggs and tortillas. Vince came in shortly after, dressed for riding with his gun belt fastened securely around his waist. "Miguel left for the trading post an hour ago," he informed her. "He'll send a telegram to Sheriff Parker and then meet us along the river trail." "What about your ranch?" Sophia asked. "I can't ask you to leave it undefended. Lewis and Jim will stay behind. They know what to do if Thornton shows up." Vince's tone brooked no argument. "Besides, I need to go to Eagle Pass anyway. Got some business with the bank there." Sophia suspected this was an excuse, but she was too grateful to challenge him. After a quick breakfast, Vince loaded Shadow with supplies while Sophia changed into riding clothes. Maria had altered for her overnight a split skirt and blouse that would be more practical for the journey. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as they set out, Sophia riding behind Vince on Shadow once more. The big Palomino seemed fresh despite yesterday's exertions, moving with fluid grace across the landscape. They followed an arroyo for several miles before turning south toward the river. The terrain was rough, but Shadow navigated it confidently under Vince's sure guidance. As the sun rose higher, the heat built, but it was tempered somewhat by the increasing vegetation as they neared the water. "The Rio Grande was just a trickle last summer," Vince commented as they rode. "Worst drought in 20 years. But the winter rains were good this year, the river's running strong now." By mid-morning, they reached the river trail Vince had described. The Rio Grande flowed broad and steady to their right, while a dense line of cottonwoods and willows provided welcome shade and concealment. They paused to rest Shadow and eat some of the provisions. Maria had packed cold tortillas filled with beans and dried beef. "Your ranch is beautiful," Sophia said as they sat beneath a cottonwood. "How did you come to settle in this particular place?" Vince smiled, his expression softening with fondness. "It was Shadow who found it, actually. I'd been riding the territory for weeks, looking for the right place. One day, Shadow took off like he'd been stung by a bee, followed him right to that spring you saw yesterday. The water was sweet, the grass good, seemed like an omen." "It suits you," Sophia observed. "You seem at home there." "It's not an easy life," Vince admitted, "but it's a good one. Honest work, open skies." He glanced at her curiously. "What about you? Will you be content in Eagle Pass working in your aunt's shop?" Sophia considered the question. "I don't know. I've never had much choice in where I lived or what I did. My parents died when I was 16, and my uncle took me in out of obligation, not affection. Aunt Beatrice is offering me independence of a sort." "What would you choose if you could do anything?" Vince asked. "I'd like to teach," Sophia replied without hesitation. "I've always loved books and learning. Eagle Pass has a small school. Perhaps someday they might need another teacher." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of a horse approaching. Vince immediately reached for his rifle, motioning for Sophia to move behind the tree. "Stay down," he whispered, positioning himself between her and the approaching rider. The tension eased when Miguel appeared around the bend, riding hard but without signs of pursuit. "Senor Vincent," he called as he drew near. "I sent the telegram." Sheriff Parker replied right away he will meet us at Widow Carson's place, just outside of town. "Good work, Miguel," Vince said. "Any sign of Thornton or his men?" Miguel dismounted, leading his horse to the river to drink. "Not at the trading post, but there is talk." They were seen crossing Diablo Creek this morning, heading west. Vince frowned. "West would take them toward my ranch. They must be casting a wide net." "What does this mean for us?" Sophia asked, stepping out from behind the tree. "It means we stick to the river trail and keep moving," Vince decided. "If we push hard, we can reach Widow Carson's place by nightfall." They continued their journey with renewed urgency, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. The river trail wound through increasingly hilly terrain, with rocky outcroppings that provided good vantage points. Vince frequently scanned their back trail, alert for any sign of pursuit. By late afternoon, dark clouds were building on the western horizon, unusual for the season. "Storm coming," Miguel noted with concern. "Spring thunderstorm, could be bad." "How far to the widow's place?" Sophia asked, eyeing the threatening sky. "Another 2 hours at least," Vince replied. "We might not beat the rain." The first fat droplets began to fall as they entered a narrow canyon, the river running swift and turbulent beside them. Within minutes, the rain intensified, becoming a drenching downpour that reduced visibility to mere yards. Thunder boomed overhead, and lightning split the sky in jagged streaks. "We need shelter," Vince shouted over the storm. "There's a cave up ahead where the canyon widens." They urged their tired horses forward through the deluge. Shadow, sure-footed despite the slippery ground, led the way. Miguel followed, struggling to control his nervous mount as another thunderclap shook the canyon. The cave, Vince remembered, was a shallow indentation in the canyon wall, but it was deep enough to provide shelter from the worst of the storm. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses inside. Miguel immediately began checking his mount for injuries, while Vince helped Sophia dismount. "You're soaked through," he observed with concern, noticing her shivering. "I'm all right," she insisted, though her teeth chattered slightly. Vince shrugged out of his oilskin coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "It's not much, but it's dry inside at least." Miguel produced a small flask from his saddlebag. "Tequila," he offered. "Good for the cold, señorita." Sophia accepted the flask with a grateful smile, taking a small sip that burned all the way down, but immediately sent warmth spreading through her chest. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. The rain fell in sheets, and the river had already risen, churning with muddy, debris-filled water. "This is no ordinary spring storm," Vince muttered, watching the rapidly rising water with concern. "Miguel, how was the river at Diablo Crossing this morning?" "Low enough to cross safely," Miguel replied, following Vince's gaze. "But this—" He shook his head. "What are you thinking?" Sophia asked, noting the exchange of worried glances. "I'm thinking we might be trapped on this side for a while," Vince explained. "If the river keeps rising, the crossing near Widow Carson's will be impassable." As if to punctuate his words, a massive lightning strike illuminated the canyon, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The horses whinnied in alarm, and Shadow pressed closer to Vince, seeking reassurance. "We'll wait it out," Vince decided, patting Shadow's neck. "The storm will pass, and we'll figure out our next move." Hours later, the storm showed no signs of abating. They had built a small fire near the mouth of the cave, carefully positioned to avoid the worst of the wind-driven rain. Miguel had fallen asleep against his saddle, while Vince kept watch, occasionally stepping to the cave entrance to check conditions. Sophia sat wrapped in Vince's coat, staring into the flames. The events of the past 2 days had left her emotionally and physically drained, yet sleep eluded her. Every crash of thunder made her flinch, reminding her of gunshots. "You should try to rest," Vince said softly, returning to sit beside her. "Tomorrow will be another long day." "I can't stop thinking about them," Sophia admitted, her voice barely audible over the storm. "The people on the stage coach." There was a young couple traveling to El Paso for their wedding, and an older gentleman returning to his ranch. They didn't deserve to die like that. Vince was silent for a moment. No, they didn't. Men like Thornton have no regard for human life. "I keep wondering why I survived when they didn't," Sophia continued, tears welling in her eyes. "I was just lucky. They stopped to make camp for the night, and Thornton and his men were drinking heavily. I managed to slip away while they were arguing over their share of the loot." "That wasn't just luck," Vince said firmly. "That was courage and quick thinking." His hand covered hers briefly. "And now your testimony can help bring them to justice." Sophia looked at him, truly seeing the man who had risked his life to save a stranger. His face was illuminated by the firelight, shadows accentuating the strong lines of his jaw and cheekbones. There was compassion in his eyes, but also determination and something else that made her heart beat faster. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "You could have ridden past." "Most men would have." Vince's gaze held her steadily. "I'm not most men." "No," she agreed softly. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then a particularly violent gust of wind sent sparks flying from the fire, breaking the spell. Vince cleared his throat and stood. "I should check the horses." While he moved away, Sophia wrapped the coat more tightly around herself, confused by the intensity of her reaction to him. She had known Vincent Harrington for barely a day, yet she felt connected to him in a way she couldn't explain, as if the terrifying circumstances that had brought them together had compressed time, allowing her to see the essence of the man more clearly than would have been possible otherwise. By morning, the storm had finally passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The river had indeed risen dramatically, turning what had been a manageable stream into a roaring torrent that had overflowed its banks in places. "The crossing will definitely be flooded," Vince confirmed as they surveyed the scene from the cave entrance. "We'll need to find another way around." Miguel knew of a higher crossing about 5 miles upstream, a natural stone bridge that would likely still be passable. It would take them well out of their way, but there seemed little alternative. They set out as soon as the horses were saddled, picking their way carefully along the muddy trail. The going was slow, with frequent detours around washouts and fallen trees. By midday, they had made less progress than Vince had hoped, and he was becoming increasingly alert to their surroundings. "Something's not right," he muttered to Miguel as they paused to rest the horses. "There should be more wildlife after a storm like that. It's too quiet." Miguel nodded grimly. "Someone has passed this way recently. The birds are still frightened." Vince made a decision. "We'll leave the trail here, cut through those hills to the east. It's rougher terrain but less predictable." Sophia, sensing their unease, asked no questions as they changed course, guiding the horses into a rocky ravine that led away from the river. The new path was arduous, requiring them to dismount and lead the horses in places where the footing was treacherous. They had been traveling this way for perhaps an hour when Shadow suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward alertly. Vince immediately signaled for silence, listening intently. The faint sound of voices carried on the breeze, coming from somewhere ahead. "Stay here with Miss Keller," Vince whispered to Miguel, handing him Shadow's reins. "I'll scout ahead." Before Sophia could protest, Vince had disappeared among the rocks, moving with surprising stealth for a man of his size. The minutes stretched endlessly as they waited for his return, every sound making them tense. When Vince finally reappeared, his expression was grim. "Thornton and his men," he confirmed in a low voice. "They've set up a camp at the stone bridge crossing. Must have guessed we'd try to come this way after the storm." "How many?" Miguel asked. "I counted 5. Thornton, the 2 who were chasing Miss Keller yesterday, and 2 more I don't recognize." Sophia's face had gone pale. "What do we do now?" Vince considered their options. "We can't go back, the river's too high downstream, and we can't fight our way through. They outnumber us, and they're well armed." He paused, thinking. "There's another possibility. There's an old Apache trail that leads through the high country to the east. It eventually comes out about 10 miles north of Eagle Pass." "Is it passable?" Miguel asked dubiously. "It's difficult terrain," Vince admitted, "and it will add at least a day to our journey, but it might be our best chance to avoid Thornton." "The Apache trail, then," Sophia said with quiet determination. "I'd rather face difficult terrain than wade Thornton." They altered course again, climbing steadily into rockier, more rugged country. The Apache trail, when they found it, was barely visible, just a faint line etched into the landscape, discernible only to experienced eyes. Vince led the way, with Shadow picking his path carefully among the stones. Miguel followed with his horse, and Sophia rode behind him. The afternoon wore on, the sun beating down relentlessly as they ascended. The vegetation changed with the altitude, becoming sparser and more specialized tough grasses, scraggly juniper, and occasionally the brilliant red bloom of a claret cup cactus nestled among the rocks. By sunset, they had reached a small plateau that offered a commanding view of the country they had traversed. In the far distance, Sophia could see the ribbon of the Rio Grande winding through the landscape, golden in the dying light. "We'll camp here tonight," Vince decided. "There's a seep spring nearby for water, and the position gives us good visibility in all directions." They made camp efficiently, with Miguel gathering what sparse fuel he could find for a small fire while Vince tended to the horses. Sophia helped prepare a simple meal from their dwindling supplies, the last of the dried meat, and some parched corn that Miguel carried in his saddlebag. As darkness fell, bringing with it the desert's penetrating chill, they gathered around the tiny fire. Miguel offered to take the first watch, leaving Vince and Sophia alone as he moved to a rocky outcropping with a good view of the trail below. "You've been quiet today," Vince observed, studying Sophia across the flames. She smiled faintly. "Just thinking about what happens when we reach Eagle Pass, about testifying against Thornton." "Sheriff Parker will protect you," Vince assured her, "and your aunt's place should be safe once the immediate danger has passed." "And what about you?" Sophia asked softly. "Will you go back to your ranch once you've delivered me safely?" The question hung in the air between them. Vince poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise into the night sky. "I suppose that depends," he said finally, his voice measured. "On what?" His eyes met hers across the fire. "On whether there's a reason for me to stay." Sophia's heart quickened at his words and the intensity in his gaze. "I wouldn't want you to feel obligated," she said carefully. "You've already done so much." "Obligation has nothing to do with it," Vince replied, setting aside the stick and moving to sit beside her. "Sophia, I know we've known each other only 2 days, but—" He paused, searching for words. "In my experience, sometimes life shows you what matters in the space of a heartbeat. When I saw you running across that desert, something inside me recognized you, not your face, but your spirit, your courage." Sophia was silent, absorbing his words, feeling the truth of them resonate within her. This connection between them defied conventional understanding, yet it was undeniably real. "I feel it too," she admitted finally. "This recognition, as if we were meant to find each other in that desert." She looked down at her hands. "But my life is so unsettled right now. I don't even know if I'll stay in Eagle Pass once this is over." Vince covered her hand with his own. "I'm not asking for promises, Sophia, just possibility." Before she could respond, Miguel's urgent whistle cut through the night. Vince was on his feet instantly, moving to join him at the lookout point. Sophia followed, her heart racing with renewed fear. In the moonlit landscape below, they could see the distant flicker of torches moving along the trail they had abandoned earlier that day. "Thornton," Vince confirmed grimly. "They must have picked up our trail." "But how could they follow us in the dark?" Sophia asked, bewildered. Miguel's expression was somber. "One of the men with Thornton is Hector Navarro. He is known as a tracker who can follow a trail others cannot see. Some say he is part Apache himself." "We need to move," Vince decided. "Now, they're still several hours behind us, but we can't risk them gaining ground while we sleep." They broke camp quickly, loading their meager belongings onto the horses. The moon provided enough light to navigate by, though they moved more slowly than during daylight hours. The Apache trail grew increasingly precarious, winding through narrow defiles where a misstep could send horse and rider plummeting down steep ravines. Shadow, with his sure-footed grace, led the way confidently. Vince kept a hand on Sophia's arm as they walked their horses through the most treacherous sections, his touch steadying her when the path seemed to disappear altogether. By dawn, they had crossed the highest point of the trail and begun their descent toward gentler country. They paused briefly at a sheltered spot to rest the horses and eat a sparse breakfast of the last parched corn. "How much farther to Eagle Pass?" Sophia asked, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "If we push hard, we might make it by tomorrow afternoon," Vince replied. "But the horses are tired. Shadow could manage it, but Miguel's mount is showing signs of strain." Miguel had been examining his horse's legs with concern. "He stepped badly on that last descent. The tendon is swelling." "We can't risk laming him," Vince said. "We'll need to slow our pace." The decision was made for them when, an hour later, Miguel's horse began to limp noticeably. They were forced to stop at a small, sheltered canyon with a trickle of water flowing through it. "I will stay here with him," Miguel said firmly. "You two go ahead. I can defend myself if Thornton comes." Vince shook his head. "I'm not leaving you alone out here. Senor, the senorita must reach Eagle Pass. Your shadow can carry both of you much faster than we can travel with my injured horse. I will hide myself well, and when my horse is rested, I will follow." After much debate, they reached a compromise. Miguel would remain hidden in the canyon until his horse recovered enough to travel. Vince and Sophia would continue to Eagle Pass, leaving Miguel with most of their remaining ammunition and supplies. Once they reached town, Vince would return with help if Miguel hadn't already arrived. The parting was difficult. Miguel had proven himself not just a loyal employee but a true friend during their journey. He embraced Vince formally, then bowed over Sophia's hand. "Go with God, senorita," he said simply. "I will see you again soon." Sophia and Vince mounted Shadow, who accepted the double burden without complaint. With a final wave to Miguel, they set off once more, following the ancient Apache trail as it wound through increasingly gentle terrain. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a grassy plateau where the trail joined a more established path. Vince allowed Shadow to rest, and they shared their last bit of jerky. "If we follow this trail, it will take us to Broken Spoke Ranch," Vince explained. "The owner, John Mackenzie is a friend. We can get fresh horses there and be in Eagle Pass by tomorrow morning." The plan made sense, but as they prepared to continue, the distant sound of gunfire echoed across the landscape, 3 shots in rapid succession, coming from the direction they had left Miguel. Vince's face went ashen. "That's Miguel's rifle." Sophia clutched his arm. Thornton must have found him. For a moment, Vince was torn, clearly wanting to go back for his friend, but knowing his duty was to get Sophia to safety. Before he could decide, another series of shots rang out, followed by the unmistakable sound of men shouting. "We have to keep moving," he said finally, the words clearly costing him. Miguel knew the risks. He would want us to reach Eagle Pass. With heavy hearts, they mounted Shadow once more and continued toward Broken Spoke Ranch. The Palomino, sensing their urgency, pushed on tirelessly despite his fatigue. As the sun began to set, they crested a rise and saw the ranch buildings in the distance, a substantial main house, several outbuildings and corrals containing horses. "Thank God," Sophia murmured. "We've made it." But as they drew closer, Vince suddenly reined Shadow to a halt. "Something's wrong," he said tensely. "There should be more activity at this hour, and the chimney no smoke." They approached cautiously, Vince's hand resting on his holstered revolver. The ranch yard was deserted, with an unnatural stillness that set their nerves on edge. When they reached the main house, Vince dismounted, helping Sophia down before tying Shadow to the hitching post. "Stay behind me," he instructed, drawing his gun as he mounted the porch steps. The front door stood slightly ajar. Vince pushed it open cautiously, revealing a scene of disarray: furniture overturned, papers scattered, a lamp lying broken on the floor. "Mackenzie," Vince called, his voice echoing in the empty house. "John, are you here?" A faint groan came from the back of the house. They followed the sound to the kitchen, where they found John Mackenzie slumped against the wall, blood staining his shirt from a wound in his shoulder. "Vincent," the man croaked, squinting up at them. "That you?" "It's me, John." Vince knelt beside him, examining the wound. "What happened?" "Thornton and his gang," Mackenzie managed. "They came looking for a woman. When I said I hadn't seen anyone, they didn't believe me." He coughed painfully. "Shot me, ransacked the place, took my best horses." Sophia had found a clean cloth and was pressing it against the rancher's wound. "When did this happen?" she asked urgently. "Few hours ago," Mackenzie replied. "They headed toward Eagle Pass, said something about watching the roads." Vince and Sophia exchanged alarmed glances. Thornton was ahead of them now, positioned to intercept them on the final approach to town. "The wound's not fatal," Vince assessed, "but it needs tending." "Is anyone else here?" "Hands are out with the herd," Mackenzie said. "Won't be back till tomorrow." They helped Mackenzie to a chair, cleaned and bandaged his wound properly, and gave him water. Despite his protests, they couldn't leave him alone in his condition. "There's a line shack about 5 miles south of here," Mackenzie suggested. "My foreman checks it weekly. Might be your best bet for lying low until help comes." It was their only option. With Thornton watching the roads to Eagle Pass, they couldn't risk the direct approach. Vince found food in the pantry while Sophia collected what medical supplies she could find. They also discovered a rifle and ammunition, which Vince added to their provisions. After making Mackenzie as comfortable as possible, they set out once more. Night had fallen completely, but the moon provided enough light to follow the trail Mackenzie had described. Shadow, though clearly tired, continued gamely, seeming to understand the importance of their mission. The line shack, when they found it, was little more than a one-room cabin with a lean-to for horses. It was basic but defensible, with thick walls and small windows that could be shuttered from within. A stream ran nearby, providing fresh water. We'll rest here tonight, Vince decided, helping Sophia dismount. Shadow needs recovery time, and so do we. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get past Thornton's men. Inside, the shack was dusty but intact, with a small fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow cot. Vince built a small fire while Sophia organized their supplies. "You should take the cot," Vince said as they ate a simple meal of beans and hardtack found in the shack's stores. "I'll keep watch." "You've barely slept in days," Sophia protested. "We can take turns." Her concern touched him, but Vince was adamant. "I'll wake you if I need to rest. I promise." After their meal, Sophia reluctantly settled on the cot while Vince positioned himself near the window, rifle across his knees. The small cabin was quiet except for the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of Shadow moving in the lean-to. Despite her exhaustion, Sophia found it difficult to sleep. Her mind replayed the events of the past days, the narrow escapes, the growing connection with the quiet, determined man now watching over her. When she finally drifted off, her sleep was fitful, disturbed by dreams of pursuit and capture. She awoke sometime in the early morning hours to find Vince still at his post, his profile outlined against the dying fire. Without thinking, she rose and went to him, touching his shoulder gently. "Your turn to rest," she said softly. "I'll watch." Vince turned, his face shadowed with fatigue but his eyes still alert. "I'm all right," he began, but Sophia shook her head, cutting off his protest. "You're no good to either of us if you collapse from exhaustion," she said firmly. "I can handle the rifle, and I'll wake you at the first sign of trouble." After a moment's hesitation, Vince nodded. He handed her the rifle, their fingers brushing in the exchange. 2 hours, he conceded. "Then wake me regardless." He settled onto the cot, and within minutes his breathing had deepened into sleep. Sophia watched him for a moment, struck by how vulnerable he looked in repose. The hard lines of his face softened. This man had risked everything for her: his ranch, his safety, perhaps even his life. The realization filled her with a complex mix of emotions: gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that she was only beginning to acknowledge. Turning her attention to her watch, Sophia moved to the window, peering out at the moonlit landscape. All was quiet, with only the rustle of night creatures disturbing the stillness. She checked Shadow in the lean-to, finding the horse resting comfortably, then returned to her post. As promised, she woke Vince after 2 hours. He came awake instantly, fully alert despite the brevity of his rest. "All quiet?" he asked, accepting the rifle back from her. "Not a sound," she confirmed. "You should sleep more." But Vince shook his head, moving to stoke the fire. "Dawn soon," he observed. "We need to plan our next move." They sat at the rough table, using a stick to draw in the dirt floor as Vince outlined the terrain between their current position and Eagle Pass. "Thornton will have men watching the main trails," he explained. "But there's a back way through the hills here." He indicated a route on their crude map. "It's little used except by locals. If we can reach this point by midday, we might slip into town unnoticed." "And once we're there," Sophia asked, "Thornton might have men in town as well. Sheriff Parker's office is near the north edge of town. If we can reach him, he can provide protection while we figure out how to contact your aunt safely." Their planning was interrupted by the distant sound of a horse approaching. Vince immediately moved to the window, rifle ready. "Single rider," he reported tensely. "Coming fast." They extinguished the fire quickly, and Vince positioned himself at the window while Sophia took cover behind the heavy table, the pistol Vince had given her clutched in her hands. As the rider drew closer, Vince's posture suddenly relaxed. "It's Miguel," he exclaimed with disbelief. He threw open the door as Miguel rode into the clearing, his horse lathered with sweat but moving steadily. Gracias a Dios, Miguel exclaimed, dismounting quickly. I feared I would not find you. Vince embraced his friend fiercely. We heard shots, thought Thornton had found you. Miguel nodded grimly. They found me, yes, but I was well hidden, and when they came, I was ready. I wounded one of them, the tracker, Navarro. The others retreated, and I was able to slip away while they argued about what to do. His escape had not been without cost. There was a bloody graze along Miguel's arm where a bullet had found its mark. Sophia tended to it while Miguel reported what else he had learned. They speak of a trap, he told them. Thornton has sent 2 men ahead to Eagle Pass to watch for you. He knows about the sheriff plans to avoid him. Did you hear anything about Thornton's plans for us? Vince asked. Miguel's expression darkened. Only that the woman must not reach town alive. The man you, Senor Vincent, they care less about except that you stand in their way. The news confirmed their worst fears, but it also provided valuable information. If Thornton had only sent 2 men ahead to Eagle Pass, that meant his main force was still in the field, likely searching for them along the more obvious routes. This changes things, Vince said thoughtfully. With Miguel here, we have better options. One of us could create a diversion, draw attention away from the others. I will do this, Miguel volunteered immediately. I know the land well and my horse is swift. But Vince shook his head. No, my friend, you've risked enough already. Besides, I have another plan. As dawn broke, they finalized their strategy. Miguel would ride openly toward Eagle Pass on the main trail but veer off before reaching town. His purpose was not to draw pursuit, but to be seen to reinforce Thornton's belief that they were still traveling together as a group. Meanwhile, Vince and Sophia would take the back route through the hills, approaching town from an unexpected direction. Shadow, despite his fatigue, was still the fastest horse available to them, and his stamina was remarkable. We'll reach Parker before Thornton realizes what's happening, Vince assured Sophia as they prepared to depart. Once you're under his protection, we can bring in the Rangers if necessary. They parted from Miguel with heartfelt thanks and promises to reunite in Eagle Pass once it was safe. As they set out on the hidden trail Vince had described, Sophia found herself filled with a strange mixture of hope and dread. The end of their journey was in sight, but with it would come new challenges testifying against Thornton, rebuilding her life, and confronting her growing feelings for the man who had saved her. The trail was as difficult as Vince had warned, winding through rocky hills, crossing dry washes that could become deadly torrents during flash floods, skirting dense thickets of mesquite and chaparral. Shadow navigated the challenging terrain valiantly, but by midday, even his legendary endurance was showing signs of strain. They paused in a sheltered draw to rest the horse and consult Vince's mental map of the territory. Eagle Pass was now less than 5 miles away, but the most dangerous part of their journey lay ahead, the final approach to town, where Thornton's men would be watching. There's a freight wagon road that crosses this draw about half a mile ahead, Vince explained. Once we reach it, we'll have better going, but we'll also be more exposed. Could we wait until nightfall? Sophia suggested. Slip into town under cover of darkness. Vince considered the idea but shook his head reluctantly. Too risky. Thornton knows we're in the area now. The longer we wait, the more time he has to organize a systematic search. They continued on, moving cautiously through the increasing signs of human presence, fences marking property boundaries, the occasional distant sound of livestock, thin columns of smoke from ranch houses and lined shacks. When they reached the freight road, Vince surveyed it carefully before allowing Shadow to step onto the hard, packed surface. The road wound through low hills, offering decent visibility in most directions, but also leaving them exposed to anyone watching from higher ground. "We'll follow this for about 2 miles, Vince said, keeping his voice low despite the apparent emptiness of the landscape. Then cut across country for the final approach. They had traveled perhaps half that distance when Shadow suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling alertly. Vince immediately guided the horse off the road into a stand of scrub oak, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "What is it?" Sophia whispered, her arms tightening around Vince's waist. "Someone's coming," he murmured. "From up ahead." They waited in tense silence as the sound became clearer hoofbeats, multiple horses, approaching at a steady pace. Vince positioned Shadow deeper in the brush, where the horse's palomino coloring would be less visible. A group of riders came into view around the bend, 5 men, moving at an easy lope. Sophia felt Vince's muscles tighten as he recognized Wade Thornton at the head of the group, his distinctive red bandana visible even at this distance. "They're heading away from town," Vince observed quietly. "Must have gotten word from their scouts." They remained hidden until the riders had passed and the sound of hoofbeats had faded. Only then did Vince guide Shadow back onto the road, now moving at a faster pace. "This is our chance," he explained tensely. "With Thornton and his main force out searching, we might slip past the men he left in town." They pushed on, Shadow seeming to understand the urgency as he maintained a ground-eating lope despite his fatigue. The landscape began to show more signs of civilization: cultivated fields, small homesteads, and eventually, the outlying buildings of Eagle Pass itself. Vince directed Shadow off the main road before they reached the town proper, taking a circuitous route through a series of back lanes and cattle paths. His destination was clear: a modest but well-maintained building on the north side of town, with a sign identifying it as the sheriff's office. As they approached, Vince scanned the street carefully, alert for any sign of Thornton's men. The town seemed quiet, with only the normal afternoon activities visible: shopkeepers attending customers, a wagon delivering supplies to the general store, children playing in front of the schoolhouse. "Something's not right," Vince muttered, reining Shadow to a halt in the shadow of a livery stable. "It's too quiet. Thornton's men should be visible, watching." Sophia followed his gaze, noting the stillness of the sheriff's office. No movement was visible through the windows, no sign of the lawman they had pinned their hopes on. "Could they have gotten to Sheriff Parker?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Vince's expression was grim. "Only one way to find out." He guided Shadow to the rear of the sheriff's office, where a small corral held a single horse. The back door stood partially open, which immediately put Vince on alert. Drawing his revolver, he dismounted and helped Sophia down, motioning for her to stay behind him. "Sheriff Parker," he called cautiously, approaching the door. "It's Vincent Harrington." No response came from within the building. Vince pushed the door open wider with the barrel of his gun, revealing an empty office. Signs of a struggle were evident: papers scattered across the floor, a chair overturned, a smear of what looked disturbingly like blood on the desktop. "They've taken him," Vince said, his voice tight with anger. "Or worse." Sophia stepped into the office, her heart sinking. Their plan had depended on Parker's protection and authority. Without him, they were vulnerable in a town where Thornton's influence might run deeper than they knew. "What do we do now?" she asked, struggling to keep the desperation from her voice. Vince was silent for a moment, thinking rapidly. "We need to find your aunt," he decided finally. "She might know who we can trust in town." The millinery shop owned by Beatrice Keller was located on the main street, a small establishment with a faded sign advertising fine ladies' hats and accessories. They approached cautiously, with Vince scouting the area before allowing Sophia to enter. A bell tinkled as they stepped inside, and a middle-aged woman looked up from her work at a small counter. Her resemblance to Sophia was subtle but unmistakable, the same high cheekbones and determined set to the jaw. "Sophia!" the woman exclaimed, dropping the hat she had been trimming and rushing forward. "My God, is it really you?" "Aunt Beatrice," Sophia confirmed, embracing the woman with evident relief. "I'm so sorry to arrive like this." Beatrice Keller drew back, her hands still gripping Sophia's arms as she examined her niece's face. "We heard about the stagecoach attack," she said gravely. "When you didn't arrive as scheduled, I feared the worst." Her gaze shifted to Vince, who had taken up a position near the window, watching the street vigilantly. "And who is this gentleman?" "Vincent Harrington," Vince introduced himself briefly. "Mrs. Keller, I don't want to alarm you, but your niece is in danger. The men who attacked the stagecoach are looking for her." Beatrice's expression hardened. "I know," she said, surprising them both. "Sheriff Parker came to warn me yesterday. He said they were watching the shop." "Parker is alive, then?" Vince asked urgently. "As far as I know," Beatrice replied. "But he left town early this morning, said he was going to telegraph the Rangers in San Antonio for assistance." Her face clouded with concern. "When he didn't return, I began to worry." The news was both reassuring and troubling. If Parker had managed to contact the Rangers, help might already be on the way. But his failure to return suggested Thornton might have intercepted him on his way back to town. "We need a safe place to hide until the Rangers arrive," Vince explained. "Somewhere Thornton's men won't think to look." Beatrice considered this, her brow furrowed in thought. "There's a room above the shop," she offered. "It's small, but it has a separate entrance from the alley. My late husband used it as a storeroom. It wasn't ideal, but it might serve for a short period." Vince helped bring Shadow around to the alley behind the shop, where the horse could be stabled out of sight. Beatrice then led them up a narrow exterior staircase to the room she had mentioned. The space was indeed small, with sloped ceilings and a single window overlooking the alley. Dust covers draped over furniture indicated it had not been used in some time, but it was clean and offered basic amenities: a bed, a small table with chairs, a washstand with pitcher and basin. "It's not much," Beatrice apologized, "but you'll be safe here. I'll bring food and news when I can." After she left, Sophia sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the past days suddenly catching up with her. Vince remained by the window, keeping watch on the alley below. "Do you think the Rangers will come?" Sophia asked, her voice small in the quiet room. "If Parker managed to get the telegram through, yes," Vince replied. "Thornton's gang has been a thorn in their side for months. They won't ignore a chance to bring him in." The question that had been lingering between them since their conversation at the campfire now resurfaced with new urgency. Once this was over, if they survived it, what then? Vince turned from the window to find Sophia watching him, the same question evident in her eyes. "Sophia," he began hesitantly. When this is finished, a sudden commotion from the street below interrupted him. Shouts, the sound of running feet, and then a gunshot echoed through the afternoon air. Vince moved quickly to the window, careful to stay to one side to avoid being seen. "What is it?" Sophia asked, rising to join him. "Not sure," Vince muttered, scanning the limited view of the street. "Something's happening at the north end of town." More shots rang out, followed by the sound of horses galloping. A man's voice unfamiliar to them could be heard shouting orders. Then, amazingly, they heard Miguel's distinctive call. "Los Rangers. Han Legado Los Rangers." Vince's face broke into a grim smile. "The Rangers," he confirmed. "They've come." The noise increased with the unmistakable sounds of a confrontation unfolding. Vince was torn between his instinct to join the fight and his duty to protect Sophia. "Stay here," he decided, checking his revolver. "Lock the door behind me. I'll come back for you when it's safe." Sophia caught his arm as he turned to leave. "Vince, please be careful." Their eyes met, and all the unspoken feelings of the past days seemed to crystallize in that moment. Without thinking, Vince pulled her to him, his lips finding hers in a brief but fervent kiss. "I will," he promised as they broke apart. "Wait for me." Moments later, he was descending the stairs, moving cautiously into the alley with his gun drawn. The sounds of confrontation were louder now, concentrated around the north entrance to town where the sheriff's office was located. As Vince made his way toward the action, staying to back streets and shadows, he encountered Miguel coming in the opposite direction, a rifle clutched in his hands. "Miguel, what's happening?" "The Rangers, senor," Miguel exclaimed breathlessly. "They have come." "Sheriff Parker is with them. He was delayed because he went to meet them on the road." Vince felt a surge of relief. "Thornton, trapped at the livery stable with 3 of his men," Miguel reported. "They were returning to town when the Rangers arrived. Now there is fighting." Together, they moved toward the confrontation, where they could see several men in the distinctive attire of the Texas Rangers taking cover behind buildings and wagons, exchanging fire with the livery stable. Sheriff Parker spotted them and waved them over to his position behind an overturned wagon. "Harrington," he called, "glad to see you in one piece. Where's the woman?" "Safe," Vince assured him, "hidden at her aunt's place." Parker nodded with satisfaction. "Good. We've got Thornton cornered, but he's desperate. Says he won't be taken alive." The standoff continued for another hour, with sporadic gunfire exchanged between the Rangers and the surrounded outlaws. Eventually, one of Thornton's men, wounded and recognizing the futility of their situation, surrendered and was taken into custody. The pressure increased on the remaining outlaws, and as dusk began to fall, another exchange of intense fire erupted. When it subsided, a white shirt tied to a rifle barrel appeared from a window of the livery stable. "Coming out," a voice called. "Don't shoot." 2 more of Thornton's gang emerged with their hands raised, leaving only Thornton himself inside. The Rangers closed in cautiously, aware of the outlaw leader's reputation for treachery. What happened next occurred with shocking swiftness. Thornton burst from the stable on horseback, firing wildly as he attempted to break through the Rangers' line. Multiple shots rang out in response, and the outlaw fell from his horse, landing in the dust of the street. He did not rise again. The battle was over. As the Rangers secured the surviving gang members, Vince hurried back to Beatrice Keller's shop, eager to bring Sophia the news of their victory. He found her waiting anxiously at the top of the stairs, having heard the cessation of gunfire but unsure of its meaning. "It's over," he told her, taking her hands in his. "Thornton is dead and his men are in custody. You're safe now." Sophia sagged against him in relief, and Vince wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as the tension of the past days finally released its grip. Later that evening, they gathered in Beatrice Keller's small parlor behind the shop. Vince, Sophia, Miguel, Sheriff Parker, and the captain of the Ranger detachment. Sophia recounted the events of the stagecoach attack, providing details that would be crucial in prosecuting the surviving gang members. The Ranger captain assured her that her testimony, combined with the evidence they had already gathered on Thornton's gang, would ensure justice was served. "You showed remarkable courage, Miss Keller," the captain commented. "Not many would have survived what you endured." "I had help," Sophia replied simply, her gaze meeting Vince's across the room. As the official discussions concluded and the lawmen prepared to leave, Sheriff Parker drew Vince aside. "That's some horse you've got," he commented admiringly. "Word is you outran Thornton's whole gang." Vince smiled faintly. "Shadow did the outrunning, I just held on." Parker nodded thoughtfully. "The stage line is offering a reward for information leading to Thornton's capture. Reckon you and Miss Keller have earned it." "Give it to the families of the passengers who didn't make it," Vince replied without hesitation. "They need it more than we do." After the sheriff and rangers had departed, Miguel also took his leave, returning to the hotel where accommodations had been arranged for him. He would ride back to Vince's ranch in the morning to check on Lewis and inform him of all that had transpired. Left alone with Sophia and her aunt, Vince found himself suddenly uncertain. The immediate danger had passed, their mission accomplished. The future he had begun to envision, the possibility he had spoken of during their journey, now seemed both closer and somehow more elusive. Beatrice, sensing the undercurrents between her niece and this quiet, determined cowboy, tactfully excused herself, claiming fatigue after the day's events. As the door closed behind her, Sophia and Vince found themselves alone for the first time since their brief, urgent moment in the room above the shop. "You'll be heading back to your ranch, I suppose," Sophia said, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "Now that everything's settled." Vince moved to the window, looking out at the now quiet street of Eagle Pass. "I should," he agreed. "Lewis will be worried and there's work waiting." He turned to face her, "But I find I'm not in any hurry to leave." Sophia's eyes met his, and the connection that had formed between them in the desert, tempered by danger and strengthened by shared adversity, hummed with new intensity. "When we were in the hills," Vince continued, his voice low, "you asked what would happen when we reached Eagle Pass. I didn't have a proper answer then. And now?" Sophia asked softly. Vince crossed the room to stand before her, taking her hands in his. "Now I know that I don't want to ride away from here from you without knowing if there's a chance for something more." Sophia looked up at him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way it had not been since he first saw her running across the desert. "I've spent my life being passed from one obligation to another," she said. "My uncle took me in because he had to, not because he wanted to. I came to Aunt Beatrice because I had nowhere else to go." She squeezed his hands. "But you came for me because you chose to. No obligation, no expectation of reward." "I'd do it again," Vince said simply. 1,000 times over." "I know," Sophia replied, and the certainty in her voice made his heart lift. "That's why I can't let you ride away either, not without knowing where this leads." The kiss they shared then was different from the desperate, fleeting contact earlier that day. This was a beginning rather than a prelude to potential ending, slow, tender, full of promise. When they separated, Vince rested his forehead against hers. "I have to go back to the ranch," he said regretfully. "But I'll return." "I'll be here," Sophia assured him. "Aunt Beatrice needs help with the shop, and I think I might inquire about a teaching position at the school. The town's growing. They could use another teacher." The practicalities of separation were tempered by the certainty of reunion. In the morning, Vince and Miguel would ride back to the Harrington ranch, while Sophia would begin establishing her new life in Eagle Pass. But the distance would be temporary, the connection between them already too strong to be diminished by mere miles. 2 months later, Vince returned to Eagle Pass, this time riding Shadow at a leisurely pace rather than the desperate gallop of their first approach to the town. Much had changed in the intervening time. Sophia had indeed secured a position at the local school, teaching the younger children while continuing to help her aunt in the shop when needed. She had written to Vince weekly, her letters filled with news of the town and her growing attachment to it. Vince, for his part, had put his ranch in order, making arrangements that would allow him more frequent visits to Eagle Pass. Lewis had proven himself more than capable of managing the day-to-day operations, and the ranch was prospering. As he rode down the main street, Vince noted the changes in the town as well. New buildings were under construction, evidence of the growing community. The sheriff's office sported a fresh coat of paint, and a new deputy could be seen lounging in a chair on the porch. Sophia was waiting for him at her aunt's shop, having received word of his impending arrival. Her face lit up when she saw him dismount, and she rushed outside to meet him. "You're here," she exclaimed, embracing him without concern for the curious glances of passers-by. "I promised I would be," Vince reminded her, holding her close. Shadow nickered softly beside them, apparently pleased with the reunion as well. That evening, over dinner at Beatrice's home, they talked of the future not in vague possibilities now, but in concrete plans. Vince had purchased land closer to Eagle Pass, with the intention of establishing a second, smaller ranch that would allow him to be near Sophia while maintaining his original property. "It's good grazing land," he explained, "with reliable water sources. Miguel's agreed to oversee it for me, at least at first." "At first?" Sophia questioned, her eyes alight with hope and expectation. Vince reached across the table to take her hand. "I was thinking that eventually it might be our place, somewhere between my world and yours." He hesitated, suddenly nervous despite the certainty of his feelings. "That is, if you'd consider becoming my wife." Sophia's answer was in her eyes even before she spoke the words. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." Their wedding took place that autumn, in the small church at Eagle Pass, where Sophia had begun teaching Sunday school classes. Sheriff Parker stood as Vince's best man, while Beatrice served as matron of honor for her niece. Lewis and Miguel came from the ranch, bringing with them a magnificent saddle as a wedding gift crafted specially for Sophia, who had become an accomplished rider during her frequent visits to Vince's ranch over the summer. Shadow, adorned with special tack for the occasion, waited patiently outside the church to carry the newlyweds to their new home, a modest but comfortable house on the land Vince had purchased, just a half-day's ride from town. As they rode away from the church amid the cheers and well wishes of their friends, Sophia leaned against Vince's back, her arms around his waist just as they had been during that first desperate flight across the desert. "Did you ever imagine when you first saw me running from Thornton's gang that we'd end up here?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Vince covered her hand with his own, feeling the new ring on her finger. "Maybe not in my mind," he admitted. "But something in my heart knew, even then, that our paths were meant to cross." Shadow carried them toward their new home at an unhurried pace, his proud bearing suggesting he knew his role in their story was a crucial one. Without his speed and endurance, without his willingness to carry double through desert and mountain, their meeting might have ended very differently. "I think we owe Shadow an extra measure of oats tonight," Sophia suggested, patting the horse's glossy neck, "for bringing us together." "And for being faster than Thornton's horses," Vince added with a smile. "That's a debt I can never fully repay." In the years that followed, the story of Sophia's rescue became something of a legend in the region. How a woman chased through the desert by cruel men was saved by a cowboy whose horse was faster. But for Vince and Sophia, it was more than just a tale of danger and escape. It was the beginning of a life together, forged in adversity but built on the steadfast foundation of a love that had recognized itself in the most unlikely of circumstances. Their ranch prospered, as did their family. 2 years after their wedding, Sophia gave birth to their first child, a son they named Michael, who inherited his father's affinity for horses and his mother's love of learning. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 3 years later, equally at home in the saddle or with a book in hand. Sophia continued to teach, establishing a small school on their property that served neighboring ranches as well as their own children. Vince divided his time between the two ranches, gradually shifting more responsibility to Lewis at the original property, as their lives became increasingly centered on their home near Eagle Pass. Shadow lived to an impressive age for a horse, remaining Vince's preferred mount long after younger horses had joined their stables. When he finally passed, peacefully in his favorite pasture, they buried him on a hilltop overlooking the ranch, marking the spot with a stone that bore a simple inscription: "Shadow, the fastest horse in Texas, friend and savior." On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Vince and Sophia often sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the land they had come to love. Sometimes they spoke of that fateful day in the desert, marveling at the chain of circumstances that had brought them together. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, hands linked, each grateful for the journey that had led them home to each other. And occasionally, when the light was just right and the wind whispered through the mesquite, they could almost see a Palomino horse racing across the horizon, carrying hope and possibility on his strong back, faster than any pursuit, steadfast as the love that had blossomed in his wake.